With a total of 57 music tracks, as well as more than a dozen unused and cut songs, the soundtrack to Revita is my biggest game soundtrack to date. And because it has been 3 years now since this game was released, I figured it's time to talk in depth about the approximately 3 hours of music that I was hired to write. I'd like to share with you how I was hired in the first place, as well as go over music theory concepts and my general thought process whenever I was working on a music track for Revita. The first section of the soundtrack breakdown will be fairly heavy on music theory. However, even if you don't know anything about music theory, you should be able to follow along, as I'll be showing you plenty of examples for all the topics that we're gonna cover. We'll have a look at different music theory concepts like: how do you write melancholic music? What is dynamic or adaptive music? What are chord extensions? What is a leitmotif and when does it make sense to use it? What are odd time signatures and how do they work? On top of that, the origin of the 6 rare music tracks, a bunch of hidden and unused tunes, as well as lots of trivia, fun facts and Easter eggs will be covered. For each of the topics, we'll start with things that you probably noticed, while progressively moving towards things you may not have noticed at all. If you'd like to jump to a specific part of the video, I've also added chapters to make things easier for you. You can get the soundtrack for just 10,000 bucks over on my Bandcamp. Only 10 bucks? Oh, that is a steal, isn't it? As with all my music, you're free to use it in your own content without having to fear any copyright, DMCA shenanigans, or content ID claims. Before we dive into it, what even is Revita? In case you clicked on me, in case you clicked on this video not even knowing what this game is about, let me brief you real quick. Revita is a fast-paced twin-stick roguelite platformer where you play as an unnamed child ascending an ominous clock tower in pursuit of their lost memories. Harvest and sacrifice souls to grow your power in order to challenge procedurally generated encounter rooms and intimidating bosses. And my name is Christoph Jakob. I'm the one who wrote the entire soundtrack and who is responsible for about 90% of the sound design. What makes Revita special? Your health is also the game's main currency. You can exchange health for power-ups, upgrades and relics. Finding the right balance between sacrificing your own health and holding on to it helps you progress and keeps every run fresh and interesting. Yeah, hello, Mr. Boss? I'd like to sacrifice my own health in order to progress in your company. Yeah, at no additional payment. Of course I'll undersell myself. What do I need to do in order to get that? Move to America. Beating a regular run in Revita takes less than an hour. You try to make your way through a total of 5 different areas while beating bosses that are named after the 5 stages of grief. How did I even get hired to write the music for Revita in the first place? Well, in 2015 I was uploading fan-made Mario and Luigi Paper Jam tracks on a regular basis. You can actually still find them here on this channel. These videos used to get about 20, maybe 30 views each, and one of my returning viewers happened to be Ben, the main developer for Revita. When YouTube still had a DM function, yes, that was actually a thing back then, he reached out to me in 2015 or 2016, asking me if I'd like to write the music for his fan-made Paper Mario game. I had never done anything like that before, so of course I said yes. We became friends, and a couple of months later he showed me the concept for his game Aerodynamic, which later turned into Revita, and asked me if I'm interested in writing the music for it. I wrote 10 songs, all of which were replaced by different pieces of music later. The tunes Ancient Ruins and Tough Trial eventually made it into the final game as hidden tracks, as well as got their own spots on the original soundtrack. Earlier this year, I turned my second channel into a music-only channel, so in case you're interested in checking out the original soundtrack, all the unused and cut content, as well as prototype tracks and more, head over to Christoph Jakob Music and subscribe to that channel. What this little story goes to show is that hard work really only gets you so far in this industry. You need a huge amount of luck. You need to be given the opportunity first to show everyone what you're capable of. Only then the true hard work begins. So don't be discouraged if you struggle finding game audio work yourself. Keep doing your thing, and sooner or later people will find you and your work and they want to work with you. Which instruments and which instrument libraries have I used to write the soundtrack? Apart from the casual live-recorded electric guitar here and there, the majority of the music has been written with an actually pretty small selection of instrument libraries and plugins. The main libraries that I used are East-West Pianos, East-West Goliath, East-West Quantum Leap Symphonic Orchestra, East-West Symphonic Choirs, East-West Ministry of Rock 2, Spitfire Labs, VOPM, Harmless, Soar, Drum Pro 64 and Dramatic 4. Close to the end of development, I also got my hands on Omnisphere, my now favorite synth plugin out there, but it only appears prominently in the songs Mother and Void. I've had 4 main inspirations for Revita's music. The overall atmosphere, the heavy use of melancholy, as well as half of the instrumentation are inspired by Hollow Knight. The tune Memoria Station in particular is supposed to be a direct reference to that game. I was trying to make it sound like a combination of Dirtmouth and City of Tears. For the chord shapes, as well as how the chords are connected and how the songs are structured, I drew heavy inspiration from Donkey Kong Country. One of my favorite things to do when writing music for games is trying to find chords and chord progressions that already sound interesting on their own, even when there's no melody to be heard yet. The inclusion of rising and falling synths and the attempt to create a vast and open atmosphere in tunes like Obliterated are inspired by Fez. The final major inspiration for the music has nothing to do with video games at all. It's actually a band, the Red Hot Chili Peppers. More specifically, the fact that the bass is playing a major role in many tunes, as it is fairly prominent and melodic. The soundtrack to Revita is quite melancholic overall, yet mostly still upbeat at the same time. Recurring instruments like the piano, cello, solo voices, bass, as well as rising and falling synth textures are there to achieve a sense of consistency within the soundtrack. The bass, for example, is similar in both structure and rhythm across all area tracks. It usually consists of triplets in a tresillo kind of rhythm. This is a nice contrast to the otherwise straightforward 4/4 pulse that all the area tracks are based on. As a result, the bass not only tends to be clearly audible, but it's also melodic and responsible for giving area tracks a sense of groove. Early on in development, I was given the prompt by Ben that every single tune on the soundtrack needs to convey the feeling of melancholy and ambiguity. I like to describe the word melancholic in the context of music as music that sounds neither happy nor sad. So, how can you achieve that? First of all, the instrumentation plays a huge role. Certain instruments like the piano or cello naturally tend to lean more towards sounding melancholic, if used accordingly, than other instruments like the marimba or flute. The frequent use of interesting chords with chord extensions is a nice way to make melodies more memorable. Simple chords like major, minor, augmented and diminished chords consist of 3 notes: the root, the third and the fifth. We use the term chord extension for all the notes that are higher up than the fifth if we keep stacking thirds. So the 7, 9, 11 and 13. If you've ever wondered why barely anyone talks about the 8, the 10 or the 12 when talking about chord extensions, there's a simple reason for that. The 8 is the same as the root note but 1 octave higher. The 10 is the same as the third but an octave higher. And the 12 is the fifth but an octave higher. They do not count as chord extensions since they don't add anything to a basic triad. These intervals do appear everywhere though. The 10 in particular is in fact one of my favorite intervals in music. Having the root note and the thirds so far apart from each other creates this large and soothing kind of space between the notes. Anyway, these chord extensions, so the 7, 9, 11 and 13, are not just subtly included in Revita's writing, but the melodies actually focus hard on them, as you will see in the following examples. The major 7 and 9 can evoke a sense of emptiness, bittersweetness, melancholy and ambiguity. The sharp 11, on the other hand, can often sound vast, emotional or epic depending on the context. When trying to come up with ideas for a tune, what does my general brainstorming process actually look like? There seem to be three main types of composers. The first type is those who come up with a melody first. Oftentimes when they're not at home, they pull out some sort of recording device so that the idea doesn't get lost once they are finally home. This type of composer often bases their music on a main melody, then they construct harmonies and rhythms around it. The second type are those composers who come up with a groove first, be it a bass line, a drum groove, percussive elements, or a combination of all of them. The third main type of composers are those who take an instrument of choice, or they don't, that's optional of course, and they come up with one or multiple chord progressions first. Instead of composing a melody and constructing the harmony around it, they fit the main melody into the harmonic construct that they've created. Personally, I am the third type. I even went as far as writing down many of my ideas on actual paper. Do people still know what paper is these days? When you take a magical ink rolling device, you press it on a dead tree and have your ideas visually manifest. Do you still know this? I'd like to go over 3 chord shapes that I used a lot to achieve a sense of melancholy across the whole soundtrack. The first chord shape are so-called sus2 or sus9 chords. They are essentially 2 different names for the same kind of sound. In every basic chord, the third gives a triad its unique character. Simplified, and if we listen to it standalone, it is the third that makes a major chord sound happy and a minor chord sad. Sus2 chords lack this third entirely and instead consist of the root, the second and the fifth, making these chords sound quite ambiguous. Happy, sad, kinda ambiguous, and I don't really know how to feel about this yet because it lacks context. The melody often lands on the 9 at some point. In many cases, the underlying chord is actually a sus2 or sus9 chord then. One move I really liked using, especially at the beginning of some of the compositions, is starting a chord progression on a sus2 chord. Then moving the melody 1 semitone up so we hear a regular minor chord, and after that going up another 2 semitones, turning the chord into a so-called sus4 chord. Sus4 chords also lack the third. They consist of the root, the fourth and the fifth. Similar to sus2 chords, they also have quite an ambiguous sound. The second chord shape that appears all over Revita's soundtrack are so-called major 7 chords. Major 7 chords are major chords with an additional major 7 note on top. This kind of chord tends to sound ethereal, bittersweet, emotional, or even epic and climactic depending on the context. What makes this chord sound so ambiguous though? Well, take away the top note and you're left with a major chord. Take away the bottom note and what's left is a minor chord. So in a way, major 7 chords are like a combination of major and minor. I could probably show you more than 30 examples of this chord shape in the soundtrack. I love using major 7 chords on the 1 chord, so often at the very beginning of a tune, which generally tends to sound quite ethereal and colorful. But where they really shine is when you use them on the flat 6 chord. If you struggle understanding Roman numerals in music theory, take any minor chord, for example E minor. If you move down 4 semitones, that is your flat 6 chord. In our example, C major. Moving to the flat 6 chord always sounds climactic, epic and emotional to my ears. Chances are that in your favorite part of a Revita tune, this is exactly where this move happens. One tune that combines basically all of what I just talked about is the main theme. The bombastic and emotional main theme that you will hear only moments after you launch the game marches at a consistent slow tempo while continuously building more and more tension, ultimately reaching its hopeful climax. Even though players only hear it on the title screen for a short amount of time, the main theme is one of the longest pieces of music on the soundtrack, clocking in at a whopping 2 minutes and 59 seconds. The A section contains a string duo, violin and cello, in unison, accompanied by a lovely piano and a slow drum beat playing over a variety of colorful chords that focus on upper chord extensions. A comforting intro to this otherwise somber and dark piece of music. Two soft solo voices, combined with the marching drum beat and piano, are guiding the tune into its B section, which is a rather sparse arrangement of Tenebris Mentis, the boss theme. The melody sung by the vocal pair is one of the main leitmotifs for Revita. More on that later. Almost every time the main theme progresses to its next section, a low-frequency white noise whoosh with distortion, serving as a sort of cinematic effect, supplements the weight of the music. After 2 minutes of build-up, A sudden mood change strikes, moments later accompanied by live performed electric guitar, an instrument that will play a recurring role on the soundtrack. The third and final chord shape to achieve a sense of melancholy that I'd like to talk about is what I like to call the Revita chord. Part of the reason why I chose that name is because I genuinely do not know how to properly label this chord. Let me show you how it sounds like first. The Revita chord, from bottom to top, is using the notes C, G, D and F sharp. It's like a combination of C and D. Maybe you could label it C sus9 sharp 11 03 07, but I think Revita chord is more catchy. It has a nostalgic and yearning kind of sound in the way that I frequently used it. Random Trivia, Fun Facts and Easter Eggs, Batch 1. Revita won the Deutscher Entwicklerpreis 2022 in the category Best Indie Game. In the same year, I was also asked to talk in depth about Revita's soundtrack for a huge event called High Score. The first song that I wrote for Revita was probably the boss theme Tenebris Mentis. The main theme was only roughly the 50th tune that I wrote for the game. Likewise, the final tune that I wrote for Revita was not a final boss theme, the credits, a cutscene or void. It was in fact Gilded. The file select theme, Itinera Obscura, sounds like it's just the main theme but with some sort of lo-fi filter put on top, right? That's actually not quite the case. Would have been way too easy as well. While the overall aesthetic is a lo-fi version of the main theme, there are in fact a bunch of small deviations. It is its own unique file too. None of these variations are worth pointing out though. This is just meant to be one of those fun facts that make you go, oh cool, didn't know that. Gazing Grove, one of the happiest and most upbeat songs on the soundtrack, is actually written in a minor key, D minor. It is incredibly difficult to find any piece of music that's written in a major key on the soundtrack. Making a virtual choir sing the words Tenebris Mentis during the second phase of the boss theme took me around 8 hours. Melancholy isn't the only mood I was trying to evoke though. While it has definitely been the main focus, there has also been a focus on tense and awkward sounding chords. Let's talk about the topic dissonance and surprise. In music, dissonance can be defined as an often quite unexpected combination of sounds that does not really belong to the general style or chord progression on hand. In order to avoid the music from sounding nothing but melancholic and to add some variety and elements of surprise, I quite frequently made use of rather unexpected chords. We've already briefly talked about diminished and augmented chords. Both chord types are classified as dissonant and appear all over Revita's soundtrack. Here, augmented chords typically show up as standalone chords and they have a mysterious quality to them. Diminished chords often tend to serve as a sort of transition between two resonant chords, and they really sound like they can't wait to move somewhere else. Another fairly common dissonant chord in the soundtrack is what's called a minor major 7 chord. In my opinion, this is one of the nastiest and ugliest sounds out there. But I actually mean that in a good way. As the name already gives away, a minor major 7 chord is based on a regular minor chord, for example D minor. In order to turn it into a minor major 7 chord, you need to add the major 7, so C sharp on top of the D minor triad. To me, this chord shape sounds awkward and mysterious, which is why it mostly appears in tunes that are supposed to be awkward and mysterious. One tune that combines basically everything that we've covered in the past 15 minutes is the music that plays in a corrupted riff. In the intro, Corrupted starts on a sus9 chord for the Melancholy and moves to a mysterious sounding Augmented chord. Earlier I mentioned that I like trying to find chord progressions that already sound interesting on their own. Corrupted is one of those tunes where the chords came first. The main section has a constant sense of falling to it because of them. We're moving from D sus9 to D half diminished, which is a diminished chord with a 7th, to G minor with a regular 6 over D, to D augmented, before finally moving to a more common progression. It's all about building tension. The final music theory heavy topic that I'd like to talk about is a specific kind of chord that are used all across the soundtrack. Now, you could call it an extension to the Royal Road chord progression, or at least a variation of it, but let's keep things simple. In a lot of tunes on the Revita soundtrack that are written in a minor key, the music eventually moves to a section that starts on the so-called flat 6 chord. As I mentioned earlier, you get to the flat 6 chord by moving down 2 whole steps from the tonic chord. For example, if your piece of music is in E minor, the flat 6 chord would be C major, because that's the chord that you get when you move down 4 semitones. Many climax sections that start on a flat 6 chord use the same few chords, not because I'm a lazy composer, but simply because these chords work so well for the kind of mood and feeling that I'd like to evoke. I'm talking about the flat 6, flat 7, 5 or minor 5, minor 1, and a quite surprising flat 2 chord. This flat 2 chord at the end of the progression, to me, is one of the essential ingredients that gives these tunes Revita vibes. Let's look at some examples so you know what I'm actually talking about. If you're interested in getting the original soundtrack, head over to my Bandcamp and give me this. I mean, not 5,000. $10 are enough. You give me this, and I will put something into your ear. I will give you a lot of great music. Random trivia, fun facts, and Easter eggs. Batch 2. The choir-like voices in Last Refuge are quoting a passage from Ovid's Metamorphosis about death and losing a loved one, which ties in quite nicely to the lore of Revita. Nec mihi mors gravis est, posituro morte doloris, hic qui diligitur, velem diuturnio esset, nunc duo concordis anima moriemur in una, which roughly translates to, and for me, who will be free of pain and death. Death isn't as bad. I wished that the one I love could have lived longer. Now, the two of us fade away together in one soul. In the room where you can free an NPC, quiet voices also whisper Nec mihi mors gravis est and so on, just like in Last Refuge.
Nec mihi mors gravis est, posituro morte doloris, qui diligitur velem.
All the percussion elements in Ticking Tower Top have been made using an actual clock. Most of the accompaniment is also quite mechanical, repetitive and stiff, just like a clock. I didn't compose the area themes in successive order. If I remember correctly, the actual order was Gazing Grove, Fungated Funnels, Ticking Tower Top, Arid Athenaeum, and then Somber Sepulchre and the rest. The chord progression and melody for Last Refuge appeared to me in a dream fairly early on in development. As of recording this video, this has actually never happened to me again. Let's talk about dynamic music. Dynamic music, also known as adaptive music, is music that can change in response to user interactions or in-game events. The two most common approaches to make music dynamic are called horizontal layering and vertical layering. Horizontal layering involves splitting the tune up into short segments that can loop or transition to other segments in a variety of different ways. This technique is often used to signal to the player that some sort of progression has happened. A great example for horizontal layering comes from one of my favorite game soundtracks of all time. The Mystic Mansion theme from Sonic Heroes is split up in several different looping segments that both work on their own and in the greater context of the tune. Depending on where in the stage the player is right now, a different section of the music loops until you've made it to the next part of the haunted house.
Something may happen if this switch is triggered.
Got it! Yeah! Already!
The technique that we used in Revita is called vertical layering. If you think about it, the term is more or less self-explanatory. There is some sort of basic version of the music that is playing the entire time. Depending on what is happening on screen, additional layers with additional instruments are playing on top of it. If you're wondering how we actually implemented that, it's as simple as having multiple audio files play at the same time, while the additional layers fade in and out based on specific in-game conditions. Every single one of the area themes, so Gazing Grove, Fungated Funnels, Arid Athenaeum, Somber Sepulchre, Ticking Tower Top, Hollow Hives, Calm Caldarium, but also Last Refuge, Forgotten Station, The Corrupted Rifts, and Void, which is going to get its own segment later, consists of a basic layer and an intense layer with more instruments. These instruments typically include slightly thicker drums, a bunch of 16-bit instruments, as well as hard-panned low strings. Hard-pan just means that one of the instruments is playing on the left ear, while the other one is playing on the right ear. Whenever enemies are still in the room, the intense layer of the music is playing on top of the basic layer. We try to keep these changes fairly subtle though, so chances are you've never even noticed that the music changes at all while playing the game. Let's listen to a short section of Gazing Grove and Somber Sepulchre, and I'll fade the intense layer in and out in the same manner as it happens in-game when enemies spawn and once they have been defeated. The area themes aren't the only dynamic tunes in Revita. Both Tenebris Mentis and Veneficium Mentis, so the normal boss theme and the corrupted boss theme, have a basic and an intense version. I'd say it's fairly obvious in Tenebris Mentis, the intense version even got its own spot on the original soundtrack after all. Unlike the area themes, the boss theme doesn't have additional layers that fade in and out depending on the current progress though. Once you've managed to get a boss down to 50% of their health, a little stinger plays that transitions into the intense version. Those of you who have played Revita and are familiar with the soundtrack, how many of you noticed that there are actually two versions of Veneficium Mentis? Since the music is getting interrupted by the little stinger transition instead of having fades, I think it's not as obvious that it has an intense version. This is how it would sound like if Veneficium Mentis used vertical layering the same way the area tunes do. The shop theme Murky Merchandise is another piece of music that is dynamic. Once the player enters a shop, a dark and atmospheric tune starts playing. The closer you get to the merchant's tent, the more the volume of a second set of instruments increases. Unlike the area tracks, this additional layer doesn't indicate that a threat or danger is nearby. Instead, it is diegetic, meaning that this additional set of instruments actually plays within the world of the game, implying that even the characters can hear it. Aesthetically, it is supposed to sound as if the music is coming straight out of the little radio next to the merchant. The final example for dynamic music that I'd like to talk about is a tune that technically uses a different kind of vertical layering. Memoria Station, the main hub in Revita, is one of the tunes you hear the most often when playing the game. But did you notice that there are two different versions of Memoria Station which play depending on the current position of the player? Unlike the previous examples, these two variations don't get stacked on top of each other, but instead they slowly crossfade into and thus replace each other as soon as you enter one of the doors. Crossfading is a technique where one part decreases in volume while another part increases in volume at the same time.
Oh, shipwreck!
Bluey, what was that noise?
Nothing, Mom!
Are you okay up there?
Don't go upstairs! Because everything's alright!
In the case of Memoria Station, not only do instruments crossfade, but two entire music files do. While both versions have the exact same length and the same chords, there are still a bunch of subtle differences. On the outside of Memoria Station, up if you so will, the music consists of a cello, a high female solo voice, and a piano that has an upwards movement to it. Under the surface of Memoria Station, so the section where you can talk to the imprisoned or enter the subway to start a run, the high female solo voice gets replaced by a low female solo voice. A double bass gets added to the music that plays the same as the cello, which leads to some extra weight and thickness in the bass. Furthermore, their piano line now has a general downwards movement to it. Why would you put so much effort into something so seemingly minor? Looks at this entire video, I guess. I know this probably won't satisfy your curiosity, but the simplest answer would be, why not?
Why not? I've watched this entire video because of why not? I'm gonna tell all my friends to dislike your video and to set your houses.
I think I'm speaking for Ben here as well when I say we love putting a lot of time into small little details that most people probably won't even notice. I don't think it's that difficult to write decent music, especially these days. I sound so old right now. It's the small little details that can really make a soundtrack or a game shine though, in my opinion. Random trivia, fun facts and Easter eggs, batch 3. Whenever I hear the first chord used in funcated funnels, I have to think of a very specific song. Here's what the chord sounds like on its own. And this is what it reminds me of.
I ponder of something great. My lungs will fill and then deflate. They fill with fire, exhale desire. I know it's dire, my time today. I have these thoughts, so often I ought to replace a slot with what I once bought. Cause somebody stole my car radio, and now I just sit in silence. Sometimes quiet is violent.
Call and response is a common compositional technique where one instrument or instrument group plays a melody, asking a question so to speak, and then the same or a different instrument or instrument group responds with a melody that is melodically and rhythmically similar. In the song Concealed, that plays in secret rooms, I came up with something that I named Call and No Response. The main part of the tune is a musical conversation between B-flat minor 9 and a variety of unusual, awkward chords which are alternating. B-flat minor 9 constantly asks a question, but it never gets a useful response. All of the bosses have unique screams and yells, most of them including my own voice. For a handful of bosses, however, I mixed my voice with that of a friend of mine who I actually paid to yell for 5 minutes. The warm and shimmering pads used in the song Void are based on an Omnisphere preset called Milky Way, which is a reference to the location itself with a huge moon in the background. In Boweth Before Thy King, I actually sampled myself making weird frog-like croaks and other sounds. Music can also be an indicator of progression. In Revita's soundtrack, boss themes are split up in Phase 1 and Phase 2 versions. In most cases, the Phase 2 version of the music starts playing once a boss has 50% of their health left. Once this threshold has been reached, the music gets interrupted and the transition into the second phase plays. If a boss theme doesn't have a Phase 2 variation, Acceptance for example, it still gets interrupted, but the music simply jumps to the climax of the tune. The hidden area Void is the final challenge the game can throw at you while in a run after meeting very specific criteria. While it is basically a culmination of all previous areas into one, from a world-building perspective, it represents the inner void of the game's antagonist, her broken mind, an endless void. Void really is an extreme example for vertical layering. The further you progress in this area, the more the difficulty increases. This is further amplified by the music. Initially, it starts with nothing but some simple synth sounds and a piano. After every 5 rooms, additional instruments are added on top of the music, an indicator for progression. Once you enter the void, you're in some sort of mini-hub that you keep returning to after every few encounter rooms. I think showing musically that there's actual progression happening is important for the player, since they keep coming back to a room that they've already been to before. After roughly 40 floors, the music has reached its final form, which sounds something like this. I recommend listening to The Void in its complete beauty once you're done watching this video. With a total length of almost 10 minutes, Void is by far the longest song on the entire soundtrack. We've already briefly talked about this topic, but what does it mean when we talk about music that is diegetic? Diegetic music is music that actually exists within a fictional world, meaning that not just the players, but also the in-game characters can hear it.
Hold on. If I can hear the music, that implies I'm part of some sort of game. Nothing is real.
I could be Redshirt Chris, who's just wearing blue. I've already covered one example for diegetic music earlier, the additional set of instruments in the shop theme Murky merchandise, which is supposed to come straight out of the radio next to the merchant. Likewise, the subway theme Warped Wayfare is supposed to come from the speakers of the subway itself. In case you've ever wondered why the music production for this tune is so odd, this is why, and it's fully intentional too. You could argue that more songs, maybe even all of them, are part of the world of Revita. How else could you explain that the Fool, the NPC that plays the accordion, knows how to play a bunch of songs from the game unless they can actually hear the music? More of these tunes later. Random trivia, fun facts and Easter eggs, Badge 4. One of the caretaker's gibberish lines isn't actually gibberish, it's Latin, plena meri attingit, which roughly translates to he touches wine too often. The solo voice in Sanguine Sanctum, the statue offering room theme, was originally a squeaky and quirky synth, which was pretty horrible. Almost all modern Western music has a 4-bar approach, meaning that each of the sections of a song has a length that is a multiple of 4. For absolutely no reason at all, the sections in the song Hollow Hives are actually 6 bars long instead of 4. Speaking of, when I wrote Hollow Hives, I specifically tried to make it sound like it could fit into a Donkey Kong Country game. And I think it's quite obvious actually. The first half of the Revita Kid leitmotif appears in the intro of Memoria Station, and the second half appears in the intro of Memoria Station Deaths. It is impossible to hear this in-game without using the Fool.
And we need some money anyway, so let's go.
One topic that a lot of people like to talk about is leitmotifs. What is a leitmotif? When and why can or should you use it? According to the Oxford Languages Dictionary, a leitmotif is a recurrent theme throughout a musical or literary composition associated with a particular person, idea, or situation. In a musical context, I'd like to extend this idea to a leitmotif is a recurring sequence of notes, chords, or entire sections that is tied to a specific character, location, event, or setting. There are 4 main leitmotifs in Revita. Let's move from the leitmotif that has the least amount of appearances to the one with the most. The acceptance leitmotif appears during the fight against acceptance, the final stage of grief. It is a motif that is close in structure and mood to the boss leitmotif that I'll talk about in a moment. Spoiler, all of the leitmotifs are actually quite similar. This is how it sounds like. The acceptance motif also appears in Fate's End, the ending theme that plays after you've defeated the boss and accepted your fate, sitting on the throne, unable to break out of the cycle of grief. Fate's End is a combination of the Game Over theme and the acceptance motif, and it's so anticlimactic in a way, it should be obvious that this can't be the true ending of the game. The Mother leitmotif appears in all major songs beyond the final fight against acceptance. The main purpose of this motif is to show the player that they are now in Mother's territory. It is a narrative tool to achieve a sense of consistency. This final location and Mother, they belong together in a way. It sounds like this. In Last Refuge and Tough Love, the Mother leitmotif is not just subtly included, but it's an essential part of the main melody. In both songs, it also appears more than just once. The Mother leitmotif and the Revita Kid leitmotif, that I'll talk about in a moment, are incredibly similar to one another. I do wonder if that's a coincidence. I can't. It actually is a coincidence, but it fits really well, so let's pretend that this was intentional the entire time. The boss leitmotif is a simple melodic movement that has a strong focus on the second or ninth. As you can probably guess, it mostly appears in songs that have some connection to boss fights or enemies. Here's what it sounds like. The main purpose of this motif is to show that there's a connection between the bosses. It's also very prominent in the main theme, which emphasizes the importance of the bosses with regards to the lore of the game as well. That was of course entirely intentional and not something that I only noticed makes sense while I was working on this video. Here are 8 moments on the soundtrack where you can hear the boss leitmotif in action. Sometimes it's obvious and in your face, sometimes it's a little hidden, and sometimes the motif has been slightly altered or adjusted. The Revita Kid leitmotif is a sequence of either 4 or 8 notes that appears in almost every single tune on the soundtrack. You could also call it the main leitmotif or the aerodynamic leitmotif, as it also appears in every single cut demo track. You can find these on my second channel if you're curious, by the way, link to that in the description. Unlike the other 3 leitmotifs, this one serves no real narrative function. It's more like the manifestation of the essence of Revita in musical form, an audio depiction of the world, and it's also there to achieve an overall sense of cohesiveness throughout the soundtrack. It sounds like this. The only tune where it does serve a narrative function is in the Game Over theme Next Mortis. Only in this tune, the Revita Kid leitmotif deviates as it falls apart, just like Revita Kid if you lose a run. Call me insane for this, but here are roughly 25 moments where this motif appears. Once again, sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's a little hidden, sometimes it's slightly altered or just implied but still there, if that makes sense. Probably the most extreme example for an overuse of this leitmotif is Gazing Grove. This area track contains lots of different mallet instruments, so the vibraphone, the marimba, and the xylophone for example. While they all have their own parts, all of them have the Revita Kid leitmotif hidden in them. I really did... Was war das? I really did not need to do that, but I decided to do so anyway because I found it funny. Christoph Jakob is not liable for damage and other issues arising from people lying wide awake in bed late at night unable to sleep due to Gazing Grove playing in their head on repeat. Random trivia, fun facts and Easter eggs. The hero and the owner of Corrupted Shops are actually voiced by the same person. Many people from the dev team voiced at least one character. Ben lent his voice to Enigma, Troisnyx voiced Mother, Ship Timmer gave the Keydiot a voice, our community manager Capucine spoke both the twins and the priestess, and I voiced the characters the blacksmith, the imprisoned, the robot, the frog king, the cartograph, the collector, the fisherman, and the loop lord. The thump sound at the beginning of Sanguine Sanctum is me kicking hard against the tire of my car. I've used the sound multiple times across the soundtrack. The loud thump that you can hear a few times in the main theme is me slamming a huge mallet stick on a yantra mat on the floor. Yes, you've heard that right. The majority of the wind that you can hear in the background of Tempesta Surgit is actual real wind that I recorded in 2019 in a shockingly stormy night from inside my bedroom. I even decided to leave the sound of the blind slamming against the window glass in the music. This added an interesting flavor to the soundscape. Next, let's talk about odd time signatures. What even is a time signature? And what makes an odd time signature different from a common one? A time signature is an indication in music notation that specifies how many notes of a particular type fit into one bar. Many composers also refer to this as the song's meter. The lower numeral indicates the note value that the signature is counting. For example, quarter notes, eighth notes, 16th notes, and so on. The upper numeral tells us how many of these notes fit into one bar. For example, 5/8 means that every bar consists of 5 notes with an eighth note value. 7/4 means that there are 7 quarter notes per bar. The most common time signature in music is a 4/4 meter, meaning that there's 4 quarter notes per bar. Easily around 90% or more of all music is written using this meter. We talk about odd time signatures whenever music consists of an odd number of notes per bar, 3 being an exception that is still fairly common.
For example, 69/8. Haha, nice.
In Revita, there is quite a large amount of tunes that are either entirely based on an odd time signature or at least make use of one for one section somewhere in the song. Before we look at some examples, what even is the point of using an odd time signature? Personally, I think they can be a neat way to introduce some weird or awkward vibes without defaulting to using dissonant chords whatsoever. That way, even the most light-hearted and quirky music can still feel weird without sounding dark or evil. Those of you who have been watching my channel for a while know that my favorite example for odd meters comes from Splatoon, more specifically Salmon Run, where every single tune is using really whack time signatures. I recommend checking out some of these analyses after you're done watching this video. However, I do think it makes sense to only use one where it actually makes sense and serves some sort of purpose. The Secret Room theme Concealed is entirely written using a very slow 7/8 time signature. Unlike the area tracks, the secret rooms are supposed to give off weird and odd vibes, so using an odd time signature there to amplify that feeling makes perfect sense. For similar reasons, the theme Corrupted, which always plays as soon as you enter a corrupted rift, is entirely based on a 7/8 time signature as well. This meter in particular tends to sound like there's a little part missing in each bar. Unlike Concealed, Corrupted doesn't stay in 7/8 the entire time though. During the climax section, it actually moves to a common 4/4 time signature. As a result, this climax section automatically grabs your attention more and you might perceive it as fairly catchy. One tune where I did the exact same thing, so starting in a 7/8 meter and having the climax be in 4/4, is the mini-boss theme Severitas Mentis. There is, of course, a variety of other odd time signatures that have been used across the soundtrack. All tunes that play whenever we get to know pieces of lore about Mother, so Reflection and Old Memories, the two tunes that can play whenever you find a lost note, and the ending cutscene theme, Salvation, are entirely written in a 9/4 time signature. There is no real reason why I chose 9/4 in particular, but I did choose the same meter for all three songs on purpose to achieve a sense of cohesiveness between the three tunes. The Mother theme itself, while not in 9/4, is written in an 11/4 time signature. Probably the oddest time signature you're gonna find on the soundtrack. You hear this theme when you wake her from her seemingly eternal slumber for the first time. This is a really odd moment in-game, and thus, the music is written in a really odd meter to emphasize that something weird is going on. Technically it's a bar of 5/4 and a bar of 6/4, which are alternating, but I wrote it as 11/4. Tempestas Surgit, the atmospheric tune that plays right before you face a boss, is technically written in an odd meter as well. However, I'm unsure if that really counts, because it's more a soundscape than tune. I did write it using a 7/4 time signature though. Finally, let's talk about a bunch of tunes from the soundtrack that are not based on an odd meter, but still make use of them in at least one section of the music. Ticking Tower Top is mostly written in a common 4/4 time signature. The tune as a whole sounds intentionally repetitive, mechanical and stiff. However, after the climax section, the tune actually shifts to a 5/4 time signature. All the clock sounds keep doing what they've been doing the entire time though. No matter what the music is doing, time will just pass either way. Since this part doesn't sound overly odd, chances are you've never even noticed that this one part is actually quite weird. Likewise, Void is also mostly written in a 4/4 time signature. About halfway through the tune, there's a bit of a fake loop. At first it sounds like the music is looping now. What's really happening though is that the piano motif from the beginning makes a return, but instead of it being in 4/4, it is now in 7/4. One area where I like to use odd time signatures at least for one section a lot are boss themes. The Corrupted boss theme Beneficium Mentis, Enigma's boss theme Mortis Memoria, and Acceptance are all mostly written in a common 4/4 meter, but eventually briefly move to an odd meter. In Beneficium Mentis, it's the drum solo part that is suddenly in a different meter, 7/4. In Mortis Memoria, it's the part with the frantic low piano right before the climax of the tune, written in a 13/8 time signature. As I mentioned earlier, using an odd meter right before the climax of a tune can often make that climax hit more. Acceptance has multiple instances of moving to an odd meter. There's a weird interlude in 9/4 right before the climax. I also added bars of 5/4, 7/4 and 9/4 right after the climax. Furthermore, there's one short part that's not really in any meter, I'd say. I'd like to just call it unspecified. Right before the second verse of this final boss theme begins, I quite literally just reversed the music. Even one of the sadly cut tunes, Indescribable Intestines, is entirely written in an odd time signature, 5/8. This song is actually a remix of Boweth Before Thy King, the theme of the Pink Frog King, arranged to work as an area track. Random trivia, fun facts and Easter eggs, Badge 6. Not only does the Revita Kid leitmotif appear in almost every song, it even appears in some sound effects like the little hint pop-up. Roughly a third of the time that I spent on Warped Wayfare was actually spent on the glitching intro and outro segment. My garage door appears in the song Tempesta Surgit. This door can make some of the most terrifying sounds imaginable, even unedited. When talking about time signatures, the intro cutscene theme Resembling Repetition is probably the hardest to categorize because I intentionally try to compose it free from that grid that digital audio workstations force you to work in. There's a demo version of songs like Obliterated and Murky Merchandise that we script. There's a demo version of songs like Obliterated and Murky Merchandise that we scrapped because they were both way too happy, bouncy and cheerful. You can find all the demo tracks and cut content on my second channel, Christoph Jakob Music.
Hey everyone, I'm Troisnyx. Some of you might recognize me as the voice actor for the final boss of Revita. Mother, Natasaku, Nekun Skata. Before Christoph and Bedstar met me, they had come across a song of mine at the ends of the earth.
Darkness crowds around me to enshroud me in its noise.
They really loved what they'd heard and were determined to have me on the game project as soon as I had the right to work. For context, I was an asylum seeker at the time, I was forbidden from taking employment, and that situation would change towards the end of 2021. So the thing with Mother is that her voice acting is really particular. As you know, Revita is themed around grief. The first time you encounter her, there are the denial set of lines that get played. The second time you encounter her, it's anger, and so on and so forth. But the singing, the voice that I brought in to the project was based on the music that was already there. You've got a bit of a O shape with your lips. I did that for the entirety of the Regret boss track. There was also a credits theme that I sang on. I had the melody already written for me by Christoph. The music was there, the melody was there. The lyrics were my own to write. I based it to some degree on what I understood the plot of the game to be like. I don't know if it's an exact fit, but you could draw that conclusion. Where I am, you shall not go. Where I dwell, you shall not follow. You shall walk the road beneath your feet. You will shine brighter than the dawn, than the morn, than the daylight. Your heart will shine where mine never could. These lyrics, I was drawing it from one of my own experiences. I lost my mother very young. and I tried to imagine her imparting advice to me.
What do Gazing Groove, Funkated Funnels, Acid Athenaeum, Samba Sepulchre, Ticking Tower Pop, and A Silent Place have in common? Well, they were all never meant to be used in Revita. Initially written for a completely different and also unfinished game by Ben, we decided to repurpose them and use them in Revita instead of letting them go to waste. In case you have no idea what I'm talking about, let me explain. When you start a run in Revita, there is a fairly small chance that instead of Gazing Grove, a completely different piece of music called Gazing Groove plays. Let's take a quick listen so you know what I'm talking about. If you manage to beat an area without taking damage a single time, the chances increase drastically to get another rare track in the following area. As a result, getting to hear the song Gazing Groove in-game turns out to be the hardest by far because it's just sheer luck whether you get it or not. All the rare tracks share similar themes, chord progressions, and even have a common leitmotif. Since these music tracks are nothing but a fun little bonus thingy, the leitmotif serves no real narrative function though. The tune Samba Sepulchre is by far my favorite one of the bunch, and when we decided to repurpose them and use them in Revita, I was happy that it's not gonna be doomed to sit there unloved, forever gathering digital dust, not to be heard by anyone ever. The rhythm that I used in this tune is what I like to call the Sonic Adventure rhythm. Specifically the original Sonic Adventure though, not Sonic Adventure 2. If you've played this game, or are at least familiar with its soundtrack, then I'm pretty sure you've heard that kind of rhythm before. Let's listen to part of Samba Sepulchre and try to pay attention to the drums. Gazing Groove, Funkated Funnels, Acid Athenaeum, and Samba Sepulchre were originally meant to be used as level themes for that unfinished game by Ben. Ticking Tower Pop, however, was actually the boss theme, and I think we never actually had a boss in the game. Since there's a sense of finality in this tune, we decided that it would work best as a rare secret track for Ticking Tower Top. While in-game it could seem like only these 5 tracks come from a different game, there's actually a 6th one, and that is A Silent Place, the tune that plays in observatory rooms where you can get a sub-weapon. A Silent Place served as the main theme and title screen theme. If you pay close attention, you can actually hear pretty clearly that it belongs to all the other rare tracks, both compositionally and also stylistically. You can unlock an NPC in Revita whose name is The Fool. I already mentioned that earlier in this video. If I remember correctly, one of the main reasons why this character exists in the first place is because Ben needed an excuse to have me write more music for the game. If you approach The Fool, the tune Ballad of the Fool starts playing, a solo accordion performance which I've been told is actually impossible to play the way I wrote it on an actual accordion. Whoops! There's actually a hidden secret about this NPC. Instead of talking to them, Have you tried sitting down near them? That's when they stop playing the accordion and ask you if you'd like to hear them perform some music just for you. There are 5 accordion-only arrangements that the fool can play. Once again, you'd probably need 2 accordions and 5 hands to play them, but you can hear solo accordion remixes of Tenebris Mentis, Hollow Hives, Nex Mortis, Somber Sepulchre, and also Sanguine Sanctum. There are a handful of tunes that I wrote for Revita Refocus before it was sadly cancelled, as well as a bunch of demo tracks that you can find on my second channel, Christoph Jakob Music. Head over there and subscribe to the channel to not miss any future music-only uploads. I hope this video gave you a nice overview of the Revita soundtrack, and maybe you even learned a thing or two. If you'd like to purchase the original soundtrack, check out my Bandcamp. Links to that in the description as usual. Thank you all so much for watching. Like this video and subscribe to the channel in case you have not already, and I'll see you all next time.